hand with Rebecca, and one of our main goals is to really increase the capacity across the state by providing these learning experiences for all of our educators to take some nuggets back every time and try to use those with students. So thank you for being here. My role tonight will be really to watch the chat box and put things in there and help you get into the Jamboard when we go there and kind of go back and forth. So if you have anything and you're having a hard time, you want to message me privately, feel free, but I will be here to help that, and Rebecca will be our main facilitator.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. All right. And again, you are here. We are going to dive into the science and engineering practice of asking questions. And we're going to really dive into this strategy called the driving question board. So let's get started. We're going to use the chat a lot. Just make sure it's turned on to everyone. And last time we had a little bit of, Zoom issues. So let's just keep our cameras off for now, just to save bandwidth. And we're going to stay muted. And then at the end, we are going to have time for Q&A where you can unmute yourself and ask some questions. So I hope that's all right. And let's get started. Take a moment, find the chat, introduce yourself. What is your name, your position, and what county are you from? Okay, we got some folks from Apache, Santa Cruz, Pinal, okay, Maricopa, Coconino. We are doing great here. Lots of different counties. Well, welcome. I'm so happy and honored to share this space with you. All right, perfect. And if you're still writing in the chat, that's okay. I'm just going to gently push us along. Sure, you're all seeing some familiar faces. And again, if you were on the webinar the other night, we are going to use a new resource dashboard. So Sarah has dropped that in the chat. Please do not open it. You're going to be tempted to open it as a Google Doc, but don't do that. It's going to get all jumbled and weird and it's not going to work. So make sure you actually download it as a PDF. And when you are done, you have it ready, it's at your fingertips. I need you to just give me anecdotal information and write done in the chat box so I know you're ready to go to the next thing. Fantastic. All right, lots of dones. Thank you so much. That helps me know kind of where we're at as I go through. All right, perfect. And as it slows down, it makes me think we're okay to move on. All right, perfect. And if you need support, reminder, Sarah is there to support you. All right, and so how the dashboard's going to work is these are all general resources I've used to create this webinar, but the ones that are highlighted in gray, like backfilled in gray, are the ones we're actually going to open and use. The rest are, articles or documents that I thought would be helpful, videos of phenomena, etc. And of course, at the top, we have a link to our science standards page, which we have been working incredibly hard to revamp completely. And we've added an amazing science resource page. So make sure you go check those out. And it is time to get started. So I'm just going to invite you to read over our goals for today. And really, I sort of, in the design of this, I clumped these two together. So we're gonna spend a lot of time working on these two, and then in a collaborative space, and then we're gonna take a breath, and then we're just gonna kind of go into, what is the thing that we just did? So join me tonight, and these are our community norms. I just want us to start off thinking about our norms and our shared agreements for this learning experience. And whether we're face-to-face or in a virtual learning community, it's important that we honor each other's voices. And equally important is that we are actively and respectfully listening and speaking to one another. And of course, we want to commit to each other by contributing to the learning of others through the active participation. I'm going to ask you to do a bunch of interactive things in Jamboard and the chat. And so I'm just looking forward to seeing all of your collaboration. And really thinking about why we're here and why we're engaging in the productive struggle again tonight together, our goal is to provide access to science literacy for all the students that are in front of us. Our new standards are based on the K-12 framework, which is a contemporary piece of information, a piece of research that helps us understand how all of our students learn science and helps us as educators understand how to provide access to all learners to engage in science learning. And when we think about how that access occurs in the classroom, whether it's digital or face-to-face, this is called sense-making. This is the way we provide access for all of our students, for all opportunities. And so sense-making is really just making sense of the world around us, and it really begins with questions that we need to identify. Oops, wrong way, sorry. And I found this great quote. And so if we're talking about sense-making, making sense of the world really begins with questions. We have to have that curiosity, that wonderment, that eagerness to want to figure out what's happening. And it's really the questions that drive everything we do. So that's why we're going to spend all of tonight talking about questions. And so I'm just going to invite you to read over the two labels for instruction that we have, the information frame versus the sense-making frame. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to read over this. And so what this represents are two, edges of the spectrum, the continuum of instruction. We are moving from this knowing about, and we are on our way to this figuring out. And the way we do that is through our new standards and through sense making. And so this is not just for design for distance learning. Okay, these are 4 critical components that whether you're face-to-face or in distance learning, 4 critical components for sense making. We have to position the students as scientists trying to figure out the way the world works. And those 4 components are phenomena, the science and engineering practices, the ability to share, collaborate, and feed off of each other's ideas. And of course, none of this can happen unless we have clear established norms in the classroom to make sure that we have a safe community, a community where students know what it means to be a member of that community. They know their rights, their responsibilities, and they know that nothing can happen in sense making without these structures and commitments to one another as a community in place. And so just to remind you, we are going to be diving into one of the science and engineering practices, asking questions very heavily, but there are 8 of them. And remember, they are just numbered for identification purposes. 1 is not better than 2. It is not a hierarchy. There are 8 total, but tonight we're just going to focus on one of them very deeply. And so this is in relation to asking questions. Let's see where you're at on this spectrum from A towards E, just in thinking about asking questions. So take a moment, think about it. Where are you at? And drop it in the chat. Just on asking questions. All right, so we have some B's, some C's, some D's. Okay. All right, so hopefully we're all sort of in this range, which is great. So hopefully you walk away with a better understanding of what is asking questions, what does it mean, and how do I actually do this with students? So thank you for that. All right, and just to remind you that the 8 science and engineering practices can actually be grouped into 3 categories. The categories are investigating, sense making, and critiquing. The categories help explain the differences between the practices and help educators understand the purpose of the science and engineering practices. In science instruction, we really begin with the natural world around us and have students engage in phenomena, something that we need to seek the cause of to explain why that thing is happening around us. And so once we engage students with phenomena, which we are going to do tonight, you naturally move into asking questions and investigating and using computational thinking. And these practices are really about asking questions and investigating the natural world. The sense-making practices like modeling, analyzing, interpreting data, constructing explanations. Really, the job of these is to focus on analyzing the data by looking at patterns and relationships to develop the explanations or models. And let's just backtrack real quick. Once we've engaged in investigating practices, the product is data. Then we make sense of that data through a variety of ways using these to construct an explanation or model something. And finally, the critiquing practices are really emphasizing that students need to compare, contrast, evaluate competing explanations and models to make sense of the world around them. And so these three different categories, we're going to focus on asking questions tonight, a little bit on, not too much, I'm going to kind of talk you through this one a little bit and a little bit of this one. But our main focus for tonight is asking questions. And if you're wondering where I got this information about the three categories, I linked the article. It's number 2 in your dashboard. It's a great article. And so tonight we are going to use an NSTA Daily Do, which I've also linked in your dashboard. This is number 3, and we're going to use tons of information from this amazing textbook, which there is a free PDF that I have linked for you in number 1 in the dashboard. You do not need to open these. I just wanted to let you know that they're linked in there and they're at your fingertips. And so NSTA Daily Do's have the 4 components of sense making in these lessons that they have. They have lessons for elementary, middle, high school, and these dinner table discussion kind of sense making activities for families, which are great. So the one we're going to use, and if you were on the webinar the other night, we're going to use the same one, but we're going to put a different lens on it this time. So we're going to use a middle school one called Why Does the Ice Melt Faster? And the Connected Arizona Science Standard is standard 3 for 8th grade. So I'm just going to ask you to read over the standard really quick. And so let's break it down. Let's start with the first dimension, the core ideas. Here we have core idea of P4, which is this sentence, and U1, which is a sense-making using phenomenon practices. So take a minute and just read over the core idea for P4, please. And remember, the core idea is a very large idea that spirals through the grades and will increase in sophistication and go deeper and deeper as the grades go on. And the core idea specific to this standard is written in here. We're going to talk about how energy can transfer from one energy store to another. And that's the first dimension. The second dimension, the science and engineering practice that is literally called out in the standard, since every single one of our standards starts with a science and engineering practice. This one is constructing explanations. But just because it says constructing explanations doesn't mean that's the only standard I'm going to engage my students with. We are also going to engage them with asking questions, analyzing and interpreting data, and carrying out an investigation. And then the third dimension that I've chosen that works really well with this daily do is the cross-cutting concept of patterns, because we're going to have data, and looking at patterns and data as evidence is an excellent way to move this forward in the daily do. And so in just a minute, we are going to be watching this phenomena video. So what I need you to do is either decide if you want to make this See, Think, Wonder table on paper. If you're a paper person, grab paper and pencil and do it. And if you would prefer an electronic copy, go to number 5 in the dashboard and open it. And when you are ready, I need you to write in the chat that you are ready, that you've either created this table on paper or you're going to take the one that's electronic. Ready? Thank you. See, one person ready. Fantastic. Ready. Thank you. Awesome. Looks like a lot are ready. Perfect. Slowing down. All right, here we go. So we're going to go into what's called the alone zone, which is incredibly important. So as you watch the video, you on your own, this is a critical step to always construct your knowledge first before we share with a partner or a whole group. You need to commit to your own thinking in your own space first. So in your alone zone, we're going to watch the video on the next slide. You're going to put anything you notice or see in this box. Now, the I think is really about what do you think is causing that phenomena to happen? Because remember, our job is to seek out the explanation for that thing. What initial ideas do you have about what's causing it? And maybe you can think about when you've seen an analogous phenomena to that, something very similar, and you might know what caused that. So any prior thinking or experiences with a similar phenomena goes in this box. And then your questions. What are you wondering about what's happening in that box? So here we go. I'll play it one time and I'll let you go in the alone zone. All right, take some time. Write down your noticings, your thinking, and your questions. I'll give you 1 minute to write that down. And we will watch it again. All right, hopefully you have some things written. I'm going to play it again, and this time I'm going to prompt you with some questions. So as you watch, what did you see happening in the video? What do you think is causing the ice to melt? Why do you think it melts faster on one block than the other? What do you think is the same or different about those blocks? And then continue. If you need me to play it again, just write play in the chat box because I'm not sure if it played the first time. Okay. All right, so hopefully you have some things written down because what we're going to do is move on. And I want you to look at your questions. And are there any questions that you could change a little bit to begin with how or why? Because our goal is to think of an explanation. We want the explanatory power of our questions to come through. So I want you to review your questions and ask yourself, could I change some of these questions to be a how or a why question? Or could I add a how or a why question? And I'll give you about 20 seconds to think about that before we move on. All right, so now we're going to do a waterfall. And if you're not sure what that is, don't worry, I'm going to explain it. So we're going to look at our noticings, which means your observations from this box. So you're going to review just your notice box. Then you're going to pick 2 things you want to tell the rest of us about through the chat box. 2 noticings, 2 observations. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to the chat box and you're going to type it out, but you're not going to hit enter because we don't want to see it yet. We're all going to hit enter at the same time, and all the observations are going to waterfall, and then we can look for patterns and trends in that data. So grab 2 observations and I'll give you 20 seconds to type them out, but don't hit enter yet. I know some of you probably automatically hit it. And I will count down. All right, so remember, we're looking for 2 different observations. And then we're going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hit enter. And so as I look for patterns and trends in the chat box, I can see that a lot of you are saying one was faster. The one on the left went faster. Let's see. One looked different from the other. One melts faster. And so I can sit here and I can go, okay, so we all noticed that the blocks look the same, but something is different. All right, so now what we do, when the waterfall slows down in the chat box, what I want you as kind of the student right now is to look for patterns and ask yourself, which observations do I share with others? Like, oh, same. Or, man, I didn't think about that. That's new. And if there's anything new, go ahead and add it to your noticing box. And yeah, as you scan through the chat, it's always fun to see like, oh, I connect with that idea. Oh, that's new for me. Oh, I'm going to add that to my noticing box now. So take a minute, add any new things, and then we're going to move on. And so what we're going to do now, since we are focusing on questions this time, this is going to look different than what we did on Tuesday night. So we're going to prepare for a Wondering's Jamboard. And all that means is you're going to review your See, Think, Wonder table. You're going to really focus on just your I wonder box, because now we're in asking question land. And you're going to review your questions. And I want you just to pick one really good question that you believe is going to help us figure out why one ice cube melted faster than the other. That's the rule for the question you pick. And so read through your stuff. And in a minute, we're going to get situated in the Jamboard, and we're going to spend a good amount of time in the Jamboard. And I'm going to show you multiple strategies for building what's called a driving question board in a Jamboard. A lot of boards. So pick your question and go to the dashboard, find your birthday month, and click the link to the Jamboard for your month. And when you are ready and situated in the Jamboard, don't touch anything yet. I'm going to get there and I'm going to show you the link to the Jamboard is in the dashboard. So I hope everyone has the dashboard open as a PDF so that you can click these links for your birthday.
And Rebecca, for those that are having a harder time getting into that PDF, I'm just going to put them in the chat as well.
Okay. Thank you. And when you're in your Jamboard and you are ready, type ready in the chat so I know that I don't leave anybody hanging behind. I appreciate the feedback. All right, I'm going to switch screens. Come into the Jamboard now. All right, and you're going to start on frame 1. It should look like this. And Sarah, can you let me know if you can see this screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so let me check the chat. Hopefully everybody is in the jam for your birthday month. Okay. I see someone coming in. All right, lots of readies. Okay. So I'm going to move forward in what we're going to do. What we're going to do, we're going to start in frame 1. These are called frames. For those of you who are not familiar, each of these kind of white rectangles is called a frame. What we're going to use today is just the sticky note for your question. So in order to make a sticky, we're only going to use yellow this time because I'm going to show you a few strategies with color coding and things like that. So grab a yellow sticky and take your one really good question that's going to help us figure out why does one ice cube melt faster. Click this button, type in your question, and then hit save. And then just move them around the Jamboard so that they're just kind of spread out. And you can start whenever you're ready. Okay, I see the August board blowing up here, which is great. See something about materials. Oh, are the ice cubes made out of water? Melting speed. Interesting. The rate of melting speed. Are the blocks the same? Okay. And so I'm going to give us about 30 more seconds to have everybody at least add one question in. And as the teacher, I see something I need clarified. And as the teacher, if you want someone like this one, I'm just going to attach it here to help me understand what your question really means. And that's just one way to provide feedback. And no, the teacher cannot see who wrote the note. So one way around that is you can have them put initials first if you want to, or come up with any strategy that that's the only one I've really seen about identifying students. So you can have them put their initials on their Post-it. If you want them to clarify, you can designate, like green is always going to be my teacher feedback. And then that way they can maybe change their question. But why we're really on here is now this is just the start of a Jamboard. This is where I would start if my students have never used this before. And there's also a text box. So if you want a kid to put their name, like Miss Gorelli, I could do that. You can add names and that kind of thing. However, what we're here for is to talk about strategies to support students in asking questions. Okay, so one thing I did right here is I just asked you to clarify. Can you help me understand what you mean by melting point? And that student can go in here, edit their sticky, and then maybe I can understand a little bit better. You can also have a color for student to student feedback if you wanted to do that once they get good, but we have to present them with talking stems, right? Can you please clarify? Can you help me understand, etc. So this is just to get you on here. What I want everyone to do, we're not going to do much with this first frame, but I'm going to show you different strategies of like, what do you do now that the questions are here? And how does this help us drive our learning forward? So at the top, if you're not familiar, these are all the frames I have built for us. These are really great because you can duplicate them, you can delete them, etc. And so what we're going to do, move to frame 2. And also look at your Zoom screen so you can see what I'm doing and what I'm saying on the Zoom, because otherwise you're going to be like, what? So there are multiple strategies to scaffold students into making connections with questions. Here's one strategy. This is just using the pen tool, and students, once you have practiced this with them and they get good at it, can create what we call categories to put the Post-its together that connect with one another. So here I put these together, I circle it, I add a text box. This is a text box. So I just use the pen tool and the text box. So we have things related to materials. We have things related to the ice cubes and what they're made of. Questions related to temperature go here. And if I have no idea where they go yet, I basically just make a category for we're not sure yet, unsure. So this is one strategy. Go to the next frame. So we should be on frame 3. Another way students can use Jamboard is with making categories with shapes. So there are shapes here. If you click the button, you can make different shapes. I just can make one. I can send it to the back. If you click on it, these 3 dots, you can duplicate, delete it, bring it to the front, send it back, etc. So your students are going to like to use different tools. Sometimes they might like these shapes, and these are just text boxes. And again, it's just grouping them together, and you can do it as the teacher to model and say, here's a new strategy I'm going to teach you. And then once they get good, they can, do this on their own. So that's a circle shape with text box. Come on to frame 4. This is one of my most favorite strategies. And once your students are rolling along in their understanding, and they've done, asking questions multiple times, you've supported them with question stems, they're getting really good at this. This is how you bring them up to the next level. So here is a strategy where you use pink for categories. So instead of using a text box and a tool, I'm just going to say, all right, from now on, pink is going to be our categories. So anything having to do with materials, let's connect those here. No category yet, here. Temperature, here. Ice material, here. And when I first started this jam, there were all yellow Post-its, but now I'm incorporating green and blue. What we want to start to have our students figure out is, what of our questions can we investigate? Can we get out materials, some hands-on stuff? Could we test things? Could we rule some things out? Anything we think we can do with an investigation, I'm going to change. So if I think this yellow one can be investigated, I'm just going to edit it, and I'm going to change it to green. And that means we can investigate it. Maybe we can get some materials and start figuring some things out. If there's something that we can't do hands-on, maybe it's too small to be seen, or it's really like, I need to get on the internet and do some research, you can take your yellow ones and turn them blue. Any colors you want, but just setting up some rules once your students progress to the next level of, okay, now we have things we need to get on the iPads. Maybe we have some things we need to get materials out for. And then we decide as a class, what do we want to do first to drive us to the next thing? What do we think is going to help us figure this out? And collectively, we look at our driving question board and we say, we all want to look at the block material. All right, let's go investigate that next. Or, hey, let's get out some iPads. I really don't understand how materials heat up differently. However you want it to happen, but you as the educator know where the path needs to go. Your job is to guide them there. So this is another good strategy. And then here's a strategy called question chains that I'm actually going to ask 2 colleagues to come in. And I'm going to show you a strategy for how to collaborate with students for asking questions. So what I did is I built 3 categories, and this is a scaffold. Kids may need help understanding categories before you ask them to build their own categories. And so what I framed out are, and I just did this in Jamboard, these are literally shapes. I just use the rectangle shape here. And what you do, here is the strategy. And I'm going to ask Sarah and Kevin from SRP to help us out. And they're going to come in. We're going to use the Jamboard plus the chat. So have the chat open so you can see it. And here's how question chains works. It starts, as the educator. Let me come back to my tool. There we go. Okay. So me as the teacher, I'm going to put in the first one, or I might ask a student like, hey, does anyone feel confident and comfortable to put a question into one of these categories? And so I just put this first one in. What happens now when you have one Post-it in the right category? So mine is, are the blocks made of the same material? This goes with this kind of category about the materials. Then I open it up once we have one and I say, all right, class, look at your questions. Do any of you think you have a question that connects to my question? Because this is a question chain. And when a student says, yes, I do, what you're going to do, and Sarah's going to show you how to do this, you're going to write the word stack in the chat box. And so I look at the chat and I go, oh, Sarah's on stack. Oh, Kevin's on stack. Okay, now I have a virtual line of people to call on. And I go, okay, Sarah, you're on stack. Come on in and put in your Post-it. There it is. So Sarah came in and she put, what are the blocks made of? And, you know, we can have a conversation. You can say, does everyone agree? People could write yes. However you want to structure this, give us a thumbs up, any kind of like anecdotal, like, yes, we all agree, we're in consensus. So then we start to build out a chain. And now stack is a chat box thing. If you're on Teams, you can use stack in any virtual setting. I see someone asked a question. Stack is just a really great way to say, oh, who's next? Oh, Kevin's next. Kevin, come on in. Oh, okay, so here's what Kevin said. Kevin wants to know if it's made of metal. And now we've started what's called a question chain. But let's say we finish one chain and we go, we're out of questions for this chain. Are there anybody else who has a question that belongs in this category but doesn't fit this chain? And if there is, then we would start a new chain with that new question. Once you run out of questions to put in this box, we go on to the next box and we repeat the stack and we repeat the question chains. And eventually this is going to fill up and it's going to fill up and it's going to fill up. And your students are going to go, but wait, I have a question that doesn't belong anywhere. If it doesn't fit in a category, what do I do with it? And so I built in this little arrow to show you, if you have a question that doesn't belong in those three right now, that's okay. Throw it in the box that says, we're not sure yet. Maybe we'll figure it out one day, but give them a space so they know where to go. And the best thing about Jamboard is if they already made it here and they go, wait a minute, maybe the class decides it doesn't belong there. You can just cut this. I just did Control X and you can paste it. So it's not like you have to recreate anything. You really can just cut and paste through the frames. So I just wanted to show you that trick. So this is a strategy called question chains. But now let's come on back. Here's where we're at. If you look at your very first frame, there's questions that everybody wants to figure out. Like here, I see how many about the blocks. We see ice cubes the same, temperature, melting speed. Are the blocks the same? So right now, if I look right here, this looks like something we all want to investigate because it has the most wonderings about it. And I'm going to use that as the educator to drive us forward and go, hey, we're all wondering about the blocks. Let's go figure that out next. Does that make sense? And so we're going to get out of the Jamboard and come back to the presentation. Look at your frame one and think about the questions your group is asking. What does your group kind of want to figure out next? And then we'll come back to the presentation. Okay. So now that we're in the post Jamboard, you looked at all those questions. What could we do, literally do, to figure out some things? In the chat box, what are some things we could do? Could we investigate something, get out thermometers? What are you thinking at this point that we could do to figure it out? Drop some ideas in the chat. Let's just get a brainstorm going. So we have check temperatures, put different materials on blocks, nice. Test the materials, yeah. Melt ice on different surfaces, check the temperature. Test the liquid for salt to see if salt made a difference. All right. So what we just did is we started with asking questions, but guess what? Asking questions led us to wanting to plan or carry out an investigation. And this is how you move from one SEP to the next. And so what we're really going to do, and here's from the Daily Do, what the Daily Do suggests you do, is many of us are wondering about the blocks, right? And if you look at your questions, there was a lot about, are the blocks the same material? Does the material make a difference? And what about the temperatures? So right there, you can see we shifted from asking questions to thinking, should we investigate the blocks next? And those questions drove our instruction to the next thing that we want to do. And so how this would go on, and we're not going to do all of this because we don't have time, and I'm just going to talk you through it. You get out, you have the students grab stuff, grab one object from A, which are all metals, something from B, which are non-metals. And they're going to start to collect some data through this data table, which I did link for you, but we don't have time to go through it. And so they're going to get two different objects, and those objects are going to help us answer these questions. We're going to make observations, take temperatures, touch it, and that temperature is going to help us answer those questions about the temperature. And then we'll make some predicted results and then actual results. And so as you can see, we're already going to get some answers to our questions, which is the whole point of this. And there is a video, I did link it for you, where if the students don't have any of the materials at home, they can watch this video. One is plastic, one is aluminum, same idea, and they can still gather out that data or gather all the data and go through the investigation by watching the video. And so here is just kind of what happened is the students will gather all this data, and then I'm going to ask them some questions about what patterns do you see in the data? What have we kind of figured out? And what we're going to realize is we have answered some of these questions just by going through this data and looking at patterns. And so now we have questions. And what do you do when you have answered some of those questions? Well, you go back to the Jamboard, which we don't have time to do, but that's okay. Here's a sample from a different jam. You go back to the Jamboard and check out these directions. I love these directions. You have the students go back and edit them. Green means you totally answered it. Blue means partially. Orange, still need an answer. For answered questions, edit the sticky. So do you see how she had the question and then they put an A for the answer? And so really this driving question board is something we continue to update over time as we figure things out. And whatever system works for you, works for you. This is just one example. And here is a face-to-face example. This is actually a friend of mine that I taught with in Chicago. Her name's Gretchen Brinza, and she has this great website. She's also a PAMPS winner, the Presidential Award winner. And she did driving question boards, and you can see she has multiple rooms and that her students revisited their questions, wrote the answers. And so I know this might look like really intense, but this is multiple classes on one giant driving question board. But the point is, you don't just ask questions for the sake of asking questions. You ask questions to help you figure out the phenomena. And once you figure them out, you go back and you answer them. And you have to have a systematic way for doing that. So here's just one example. And so just to summarize, I made you one slide that just kind of talked about the different strategies in Jamboard. But it's really important that you go back and answer the questions you have answers to. What have you figured out? And what are we still wondering? Maybe we have new questions. Well, let's add them in. And so here is a face-to-face. If you're like, okay, this is great during remote learning, but what happens when I go back in the classroom? How do I do this? Well, you do the same thing with categories on posters. This is a 5th or 6th grade example. I can't remember. And it's really the kids connected them, they drew them on posters, made their own labels and categories. So kids can do this if we guide them into doing this. And if you want to see how to do the walking, talking question chains, whenever we get back to face full time and we can get up and move around, we have a video here. It's about 7 or 8 minutes long of walking, talking question chains. When you get all the kids up with their Post-its saying, here's my question, mine connects to that person, mine connects to that person, and you build those question chains on posters. And so we're not going to watch it now, but I linked it in the Jamboard. It's from a PD we held about a year ago. So you can see how we did that face to face. And so let's talk about the intentional use of questions. On the teacher side, I knew I wanted you to get to some evidence. One way I can do that is to get you to ask questions for that data. On the student side, you have a lot of questions that you now need to answer. There's a need there. And your job is to help the students answer those questions, to explain why the ice melted faster. And so if you haven't seen these yet, please open number 7 in the dashboard. It's called the Vertical Progressions document, and turn to the page that has asking questions and defining problems. All right. And hopefully you have that open. And so this is called the progression matrix of elements. And on here, these are different grade bands that specifically lay out what asking questions looks like in each grade band. There are bullets under each grade band. These are called elements, the specific pieces of knowledge and skill that make up each grade band. So when you sit down to start planning, this is what you want to grab. What am I literally going to have my students do that matches this science and engineering practice? Oh, it's number 9. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. And so when you look at this, just take a moment. Where do you think we were when we were asking questions? And why do you think so? Were we around an A, a B, or a C in what we just did together? And so when looking at this, do you think we were an A, a B, or a C in what we just did in the Jamboard? I see someone said B. Yeah, we're asking questions that arise from the observation of phenomena. And so again, when we use the SEPs, we have to be intentional in our planning of what do we want the students to do. And so I'm just going to gently move us along, and we're just going to, this next part is not very long. I'm just going to break it down, everything that we just did. So really, what is this thing called a driving question board? Well, it's a tool that you can use throughout the whole unit. Maybe you have an anchoring phenomena that you're trying to figure out along the way, and you're going to keep coming back. And it helps us generate questions at the beginning, but then it also helps us keep track. Where's our progress? What do we know? What do we not know? And then we can revisit the questions related to this phenomena or smaller phenomenon known as investigative phenomena. It's also just a visual representation of the class's shared mission. What are we on a mission to figure out? What's our purpose? And here's an example. Here's another example. So we have a couple face-to-face examples and a Jamboard example. And this I adapted from the Open SciEd Teacher Handbook, which is in your dashboard. And so when do you actually use this driving question board? So it's usually at the beginning of a unit when the students engage with the anchor phenomena. But it can change over time. Maybe you figured some things out. It can start at the beginning, which enables the teacher and the students to understand what they know and don't know about that particular phenomena. And so here is an example from, if anybody knows the curriculum called SEP. This is from SEP, where an educator who teaches multiple classes decided to keep one big Jamboard, but then give each block or each section a different color that they continue to come back to figure out related to the issue. And really, how is it used? Well, the purpose of this, as I showed you in the Jamboard, is to get us to move to what should we investigate? What should we prioritize? And so one great way to do that is to make a list of possible investigations with the students from their questions, like which things could we start to figure out? And the kids love doing this. They're gonna say, well, let's go do this, let's go do this, let's go do that. And just honor their voices and get them in a space so that you go, okay, let's go figure that one out. Let's investigate that. Great, move on. Which is really the ultimate goal, is to get the students to think about what they want to do together and drive the instruction. So in K2, what does this look like? K2 can totally do this. This is a harvest corn phenomena where they investigated them up first and then they put them in water and all these beautiful sprouts started to come out of the corn and the kids thought it was amazing and they tracked their noticings and wondering over time. And then my favorite down here, do you see next steps? What do we want to do as a class next to move us and drive that instruction to the next thing? This is a second grade class that's doing this. So they decided to leave it in the water and see if the water affected the corn. So, and I borrowed this. If you are ever on Twitter, there are a ton of this stuff on Twitter. Twitter is the best place I get all of these Jamboards and examples. And I followed this gal who does this with her class. So definitely want to follow her. And so here's a grown-up strategy, upper grade strategy. Middle school, high school, there's this great tool called a questioning form that I linked for you. That's an editable version, number 12 in your dashboard. This thing is great. And here's how it works. You always start in the alone zone. We always have students commit to their own thinking first before sharing with anybody else. So they put their 3 questions here. Then they add all the group's questions here. So we collaborate, we put them together. We think by ourselves first, then we group share. Next, we look at the questions, and if there's any closed questions, we put a C. So that's like a yes, no question. Or an O, which is an open question. No, yes, no answer. And what we want to do, anything that has a C closed, we cannot have closed questions because yes or no is not going to help us figure anything out. We have to change those questions and revise them to become open questions. And that takes time and helping your students learn how to do that. And once they've revised them to be open questions, how questions, why questions, questions that'll help us explain, they rank them, give them a priority. What do you think is going to help us figure out the phenomena first? What should we put for a first question, second question, third question, fourth question? And then you honor their voices and decide as a class, oh, we all want to do this. All right, great. Now we're moving forward. That's our path. So it's really a tool to put them in the driver's seat. And so really, as we close out here, I know this is a lot of information. This, I cannot tell you how amazing this text is. The key features of asking questions is all about developing and revising what we call explanatory questions, how or why something is happening. Both the teachers and the students are critical players. Sometimes as a coach, people would think, oh, well, I ask questions all the time. I ask questions all the time to my students. My students always ask questions, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about having their questions help us figure out phenomena because questioning helps us identify what we need to investigate, and it's only related to that phenomena. So that's very critical. It's both the teachers and the students doing this work. And so really, what makes a good question? Well, as we saw in the questioning form, you need to get away from yes and no questions, like, do fish breathe underwater? That's a yes, no question. And instead, ask questions that get at the explanation or the mechanism. What's causing that phenomena to happen. So we can rephrase it. How do fish get the resources they need to survive? That we can investigate. Secondly, we need to do more than accept answers that simply name or categorize the phenomena. We no longer are in the world of just teaching science for vocabulary and facts. For example, knowing that we inherit our traits through DNA or plants make food through photosynthesis is not an explanation. That is just telling us the name of the thing that exists, DNA, photosynthesis. That's terms and vocabulary. It doesn't explain how or why that phenomena works. And finally, we need to go past questions that simply get at empirical evidence. For example, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with a chemistry lab where you get mystery substances and you test them and test them and test them by properties to try to identify what that substance is. That does not go past empirical evidence, doesn't help us explain why or how something is happening. So just remember, it's all about the explanatory power and figuring out the phenomena. And finally, what is questioning not? It is not about teachers asking students about vocabulary and science terms. It is not about easily answered yes/no questions. It is not about students asking the teacher to clarify. That's not what asking questions is. That's a natural part of what we do in a class when we don't understand something. It is not just the first step in a science unit. It goes beyond asking, what do you know about X? So think of your KWLs. It goes past that. And it is not a form of a trivia game. If students can simply search it online, it is not what we're looking for, and it cannot be investigated then. Because remember, the whole purpose of what we're doing is promoting sense making. We start with phenomena, we move to questions, we use the practices, we get new ideas, and we continually add to this process and continue to go back to the driving question board. And that is all I have on questions for today. So if you'd like to stay on to ask any questions, we are going to use the virtual line strategy of STAC, but thank you for coming. I know it was a ton of information for an hour, but I hope you got some useful strategies, and I'm so honored to spend this time with you tonight. And I will exit this. Reminder, please wait 48 hours before printing your certificate. And you'll know that I put an attendance when you get the survey to your email. And thank you for coming. If you want to go on STAC, I'm ready for questions if you need any questions, but thanks for being here.
Great job, Rebecca. Thank you for explaining that so clearly and giving us so many different ideas that we can take back. I also want to just appreciate those that were in the room that were writing and questions and trying to answer those as we went through. So thank you for also just being in the space and participating.